Have you ever come home from a social event feeling completely drained, and yet somehow feel your energy slowly coming back once you're alone? You spend a few hours at a party, talking, smiling, keeping the conversation going. Nothing particularly bad happens, but by the time you get home, your mind feels exhausted. Then the night becomes quiet. You sit down, maybe you scroll your phone, maybe you just stare out the window. And little by little, your energy starts returning. Your mind clears, your breathing slows. For some people, being alone feels like a recharge. But for others, the exact same situation feels uncomfortable, even lonely. So the real question is this: why does solitude restore energy for some people, while for others, it does the exact opposite? For a long time, society has treated solitude like a problem that needs to be fixed. If you prefer staying in on the weekend, people start asking questions. Are you okay? Why don't you go out more? Don't you get lonely? Somewhere along the way, we built a quiet assumption. If you enjoy being alone, maybe you lack social skills. If you're introverted, maybe you're less confident. And if you spend too much time by yourself, there must be something psychologically wrong. But neuroscience is beginning to suggest something surprising. For some people, being alone isn't draining at all. In fact, the opposite may be happening. Their energy doesn't disappear in solitude. And the reason might be much simpler than we think. Their brains may actually be working in a different way. To understand this difference, we have to look at one specific part of the brain: the prefrontal cortex. This region sits right behind your forehead, and it plays a critical role in some of the most advanced functions of the human mind: self-reflection, decision-making, long-term planning, complex thinking. In many ways, the prefrontal cortex is what allows us to step back from the moment and think about our own thoughts. And here's where things get interesting. Some studies suggest that people who enjoy solitude often show stronger activity in this region when they are alone. Not weaker, stronger. Instead of shutting down, the brain begins to turn inward. One way to imagine it is like traffic. For most people, the brain during constant social interaction can look like a highway during rush hour. Noise everywhere, signals coming from every direction. The brain is busy reacting to faces, voices, and social cues. But when someone who enjoys solitude enters a quiet environment, something changes. The traffic clears, the highway opens, and suddenly the brain has space to move, which raises an important question. What actually happens inside the mind when the brain suddenly has fewer distractions to process? One reason may lie in the brain's chemistry. Our brains run on different chemical systems that regulate motivation, attention, and reward. One of the most well-known is the dopamine system. Dopamine is strongly connected to novelty, excitement, and stimulation. When something new happens, a lively conversation, a crowded event, a burst of social interaction, dopamine spikes. That surge of stimulation can feel energizing for many people. But dopamine is not the only system the brain uses. There is another chemical pathway that receives far less attention: acetylcholine. This system is associated with calm focus, sustained attention, and quiet mental engagement. Instead of seeking stimulation from the outside world, it becomes active during activities that are slower and more reflective: reading a book, sipping tea in silence, thinking through an idea. In these moments, the brain can enter a different kind of reward state. And here's the surprising part. Some brains are simply wired to respond more strongly to calm focus than to excitement, which means that for certain people, quiet environments are not empty at all. They are actually where the brain functions best. So enjoying quiet time may not mean you are antisocial. It may simply mean your brain runs on a different kind of fuel. And when that quieter system activates, something else begins to happen inside the mind. To understand what happens next, we need to look at something called brainwave states. Your brain is constantly producing electrical patterns, and these patterns change depending on what you're doing. When you're actively engaged in conversation or reacting to the outside world, the brain is usually dominated by beta waves. Beta waves are fast and alert. They help you process information quickly, respond to people, and navigate complex social situations. But when the environment becomes quiet, the brain can begin shifting into a different state. Alpha waves. Alpha waves appear when the mind relaxes but remains awake. Your attention softens. Your thoughts begin to wander. And if the brain goes even deeper, another pattern can emerge. Theta waves. Theta waves are strongly associated with imagination, intuition, and creative insight. In fact, many researchers have noticed something fascinating. Many of our most creative ideas appear when the brain moves into these alpha and theta states. And those states tend to appear during surprisingly ordinary moments. While walking, while taking a shower, or simply sitting quietly with nothing urgent to process. Which leads to an interesting question. Why do some of our best ideas appear when we seem to be doing absolutely nothing? The answer may be simpler than we think. When the brain finally has fewer distractions to handle, it gains the space to connect ideas that were previously scattered. And once that space opens up, the mind can begin to move in ways that are very different from the busy noise of everyday life. If we look back at history, this pattern begins to appear again and again. Many of the thinkers who changed the way we understand the world spent remarkable amounts of time alone. Albert Einstein was famous for long walks spent thinking through problems in silence. Isaac Newton developed many of his most important ideas during periods of isolation away from society. Nikola Tesla often worked alone for hours, visualizing inventions entirely in his mind. Charles Darwin spent decades quietly observing, writing, and reflecting before publishing his theory of evolution. These weren't people constantly surrounded by noise and stimulation. They created space, space to think, space to question, space to let ideas slowly take shape. And this reveals something important. Solitude doesn't just remove distraction. It creates the mental environment where deep thinking can actually happen. But solitude doesn't only affect creativity. It may also shape the way people approach relationships themselves. At this point, a common concern often appears. If someone enjoys solitude, does that mean they struggle with social relationships? Not necessarily. In many cases, the opposite may be true. People who value solitude are not avoiding social interaction. They are often practicing something more deliberate: selective socialization. Instead of spreading their energy across dozens of casual interactions, they focus on a much smaller circle of people. For some individuals, social life can look like an open convenience store. Always available, always interacting, always meeting someone new. But for others, the social structure works differently. It functions more like a private club. Not everyone enters, but the relationships inside tend to be deeper and more meaningful. Which leads to an important realization. It's not less social interaction, it's more intentional interaction. And when social energy is used more carefully, something else begins to change inside the mind as well, especially when it comes to stress. Another important effect of solitude appears in the body's stress system. Throughout the day, our brains are constantly processing signals from the outside world. Conversations, expectations, social evaluation, deadlines, and decisions. All of these pressures gradually increase the level of cortisol, the hormone most closely associated with stress. But several studies have shown something interesting. Short periods of quiet time can significantly reduce cortisol levels. When the brain is no longer reacting to constant external input, the nervous system begins to settle. The mind clears. Emotional noise fades, and the brain enters a calmer, more regulated state. In that sense, solitude may work almost like a reset system for the mind, a moment where the brain can step out of reaction mode and reorganize itself. But this raises another question. If the brain regularly receives this kind of reset, how does that change the way a person thinks and sees the world? When the brain regularly experiences moments of quiet reset, another advantage begins to appear. Perspective. People who spend time reflecting alone often develop the ability to step back from situations instead of immediately reacting to them. In social environments, emotions can spread quickly. Excitement spreads, anger spreads, fear spreads, And when everyone is caught inside that emotional current, it becomes difficult to see the bigger picture. It's like driving through heavy fog. Your view is limited to just a few meters ahead. But someone who regularly steps away from the noise gains a different vantage point. Instead of being inside the fog, they are able to rise above it. From that distance, patterns become clearer, decisions become calmer, and reactions become more deliberate. In many cases, distance creates clarity. But this quiet advantage may extend even further than perspective. Because in a world filled with constant stimulation, the ability to think clearly in silence may be becoming more valuable than ever. When we step back and look at the bigger picture, a clear pattern begins to emerge. When the brain has fewer distractions to process, it gains the ability to think more deeply. When different chemical systems are activated, calm focus can become more rewarding than constant stimulation. When the mind enters alpha and theta states, creativity and insight have room to appear. And when social energy is used more selectively, relationships often become fewer, but far more meaningful. All of these patterns point toward the same idea. Solitude isn't necessarily a limitation. It may simply be a different cognitive strategy. In a world that constantly demands attention, reaction, and noise, the ability to step away and think clearly might not be a weakness at all. In fact, in many situations, it may be a quiet advantage. So if you've ever noticed that your energy quietly returns after spending time alone, there may be nothing strange about that at all. It may simply mean your mind works best in quiet spaces, a place where thoughts can slow down, distractions fade away, and ideas begin to form more clearly. And sometimes, the moments that look like doing nothing on the outside are exactly the moments when the mind is doing its best thinking. If you've ever had a moment like that, a time when solitude helped you see something more clearly, feel free to share it in the comments below. I'd be curious to hear when silence helped you think your best.